Okay, we live? Wow, here we are, Vertical Diet Podcast. We've got Q&A we're going to do today. Actually, we just kind of compiled a lot of the questions that we got into a list of these myth busters for today. People are asking a lot of the same questions again, and a lot of them are pertaining now to things, I think, mostly as a result of the coronavirus. They're trying to find maybe hacks or shortcuts or just trying to tune up their diet and maybe doing some things that are unnecessary. So once again, I've recruited our science guy. This is Damon McCune, registered dietitian, PhD in exercise physiology, and he's going to give us the straight scoop on these things so we can kind of make better decisions and not scare ourselves to death about some of these things that people are claiming are good for us or bad for us or the other. So I've got a little list here. We want to go down. We're just calling it fake news this week. And this has been going on, of course, all over the internet. Folks are fighting over whether or not certain foods can boost your immune system or prevent you from getting certain viruses, maybe not even specific to the coronavirus. And it's just...
Or cure things.
And we just want to make sure that people are acting more sensibly. So we're going to go down kind of a quick hit list here of things that you might not need to worry about. And I guess the first one we'll throw at you is just the intermittent fasting and meal timing issue.
So real quick, we don't want to take a real deep dive into all these. We kind of want to give you the 30,000 foot view of this. So just in terms of where the information is coming from that we're providing and where you should be consuming your information from, it's not to say that there's not good information out there in the media or on the internet, but just understand that you kind of need to go a level deeper than just seeing it somewhere. You should go to the source. And so they should be pulled from, the organizations or agencies that are meant to be doing these things. If we're listening to, Karen on Facebook, Karen's probably really nice, but that's probably not the best place to be consuming the information. So, CDC, World Health Organization, all these places, peer-reviewed, evidence-based scientific information from PubMed, Google Scholar, peer-reviewed journals is where the information should be coming from. So that's where our information is derived. And so jumping into the intermittent fasting and the meal timing, there's a lot of information out there that's just, I think we kind of need to start at the beginning with nutrition, that everything's going to be based on context. Okay. So can intermittent fasting work for people? Sure. It kind of depends on what your goals are, what your needs are. And so from there, there's this whole concept of, you should never skip breakfast. And so for some people that may be true, in terms of keeping them feeling full or feeling satiated throughout the day. That may help with overeating. But for other people, the intermittent fasting may work in the sense that they may not overeat if they're restricting their time to their feeding to a certain time period. So there's a lot of different dynamics to this. Is intermittent fasting bad? Probably not, as long as they're not fasting for, let's say, a couple days at a time, because then you're literally starving the body, and that's not going to be productive. So the whole concept of breakfast and eating before bedtime, that's another kind of strategy that people will throw out there, is that, well, if you want to lose weight or you want to get lean, you can't eat before bedtime. And that's really not well supported. It kind of depends on your activity, how much you're eating before bed. Does that fit into your daily calorie need? Because it's all about calories in, calories out, and the energy balance. And there can be some times where eating before bed, especially carbohydrate, can help with your sleep onset latency, which just means how fast you fall asleep. Which sleep is extremely important. So if that can help you sleep better, that's great. The other thing is that eating some carbohydrates before you go to bed may help replenish your glycogen stores or your carbohydrate stores in the body. So if you're training early the next day, that can help you prepare for that a little bit better. So there's a lot of different layers to it. Did you have anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I would just say in general, obviously maintaining an optimal BMI, body composition, reducing your body fat, certainly can be important for general health. And in so much as intermittent fasting works for you, then that should be a method that you can use, but it's not necessarily better than eating breakfast or not eating breakfast. And we know from some of the research that we've talked about in our Vertical Diet ebook that the weight control registry, who's tracked over 10,000 dieters for many years, lost over 60 pounds, kept it off for at least 5 or 6 years. Those folks, 78% of them eat breakfast. So it can be a successful method. Intermittent fasting doesn't impart any special
there's no
say,
advantage.
health benefits. People think it might improve your immune system if you fast, and there's just no evidence to that. So if you're not currently intermittent fasting and you think intermittent fasting is going to improve your immune system, that's not a reason to do it.
Yeah, and we should touch on the autophagy. The intermittent fasting can increase autophagy, but what will increase autophagy even more is training in a fed state.
Exercise. So yeah, that's certainly what's interesting about everything we're going to talk about today is that on the hierarchy, maintaining a healthy body weight and getting good sleep and getting regular exercise is far more important. That's your 99%, and we're just covering a few of the 1% today that people tend to get myopic about, and really in the absence of focusing on the important things, it's a complete waste of time. So that's intermittent fasting for you. It may work for some, may not work for others. It's no silver bullet. So next one on the list was fasted cardio. I get a lot of questions about that still. And we've covered this ad nauseum, but let's just hit on them while we're on the myth busting.
Yeah. And where we see this a lot is a lot of the competitors, they'll sleep 4 hours a night to wake up early to do their fasted cardio. And, like Stan always says, that's stepping over $100 bills to pick up nickels. That's just not going to give you an advantage. There's probably not a large advantage to doing fasted cardio in terms of fat burning. There are some data to show that you may release a little bit more fatty acid into the bloodstream. That doesn't necessarily mean they're being completely metabolized, though. So
it's still an energy balance over the course of the entire day. How much total energy in and how much total energy out in terms of food intake and exercise. There was a good study done by Schoenfeld and Aragon on this, and their conclusion said that the body composition changes associated with aerobic exercise in conjunction with a hypocaloric diet are similar regardless of whether or not an individual is fasted prior to training. I will say this in terms of training in terms of like your anaerobic weightlifting, training in a fed state, you perform a little better. You're a little stronger. You can get one more rep, maybe have a more endurance for that particular workout. And the benefit of being able to train harder and longer over an extended period of time may improve your outcomes for hypertrophy or strength. Yeah,
and I think this question goes back more into whole program design, right? So I'd much rather control somebody's body composition with diet and calories rather than having them do hours and hours of cardio. So it kind of goes into what do you want your program to look like? If you really enjoy doing cardio, that's one thing, but it's not one of those things like we talked about earlier. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a cure-all. It's not one of those things that is going to be advantageous beyond doing other things. So
next on our list was the Detox. This has just gotten really horrendous now. Everybody's trying to sell, silver and vitamin C in your eyeballs and whatever else. There's some research being done on some of those things, but there's nothing conclusive, and we should just, throw it to you in terms of what should people be focused on with these detoxes.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, it's the big rocks. It's the sleep, it's the eating appropriately, it's the activity. The detox, if you've got functioning liver, kidney, and lungs, your body is detoxed, okay? And so the whole concept that you need to consume a product to detox your body, that is absolutely inaccurate. So
what's interesting here, I was just reading through some studies this morning. There was a 2009 investigative report. They'd studied 15 programs, manufacturers that sold detox programs. And they asked them to provide a clear-cut list of the actual harmful substances that are being eliminated by the detox program. And of course, they couldn't provide any of them. So even the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health states that there isn't any convincing evidence that detox or cleansing programs actually remove toxins from your body or improve your health. So no need to suck down all these kale shakes and celery shakes. Completely worthless. It's all a marketing scam, and it's not going to improve your health, your immune system, or keep you from getting a virus.
Yeah, and it could actually do the opposite, because a lot of the detox programs will have you stop eating, and then you take some lemon drink for a couple days or whatever, and so now you've reduced your energy intake and you've put yourself in kind of a compromised position. So it doesn't set you up for success.
Yeah. Next one on the list is whether or not you should be eating organic versus conventional foods, and we did a whole podcast on that with Food Science Babe that was excellent. But we should touch on that again for those folks who didn't have a chance to see it.
Yeah. So nuts and bolts of that is that there's really no significant difference between the nutrient content, and there's nothing to be concerned with conventional foods. They're equally as nutritious as the organic foods, and especially right now, if you're having a hard time finding certain foods, there's no reason to not purchase the conventional. They're not going to hinder your immune system in any way. And there's nothing
no added benefit to using organic in terms of your immune system. There was a landmark study that was published in 2012 in the Annals of Internal Medicine by the researchers at Stanford University Center for Health, and they analyzed over 237 studies over a 20-year period and determined whether organic foods are safer or healthier than non-organic foods, and they concluded that fruits and vegetables that meet the criteria for organic were on average no more nutritious than the far cheaper conventional counterparts, nor were these foods less likely to be contaminated by pathogenic bacteria.
There you go.
Kind of sums it up there.
Yep.
So the next one on the list is supplements. Should we be running down to the supplement store and pouring gallons of supplements down?
So the angle that we're taking on this, the question is, are supplements needed? Are they something that people need to take? And that depends on if there's a deficiency. If there's a deficiency of a nutrient, then supplementing that nutrient can be very beneficial. However, in the absence of that deficiency, taking in a super physiological dose of that nutrient or whatever it is doesn't seem to show any benefit. So there's probably no advantage to taking additional, vitamin C or whatever it is if there's not a deficiency present. And, I'll add to that, if you're taking too much vitamin C, that can also cause some issues. So you don't want to take yourself up to a level that's going to be dangerous. So
yeah, and certainly not, self-prescribing these things. Maybe with a practitioner, if you're in the hospital and there's a doctor that suggests it's something that you need because they've run a test and see that you're deficient. There are some studies currently ongoing in, I think, Wuhan regarding vitamin C, but that isn't something you should do for yourself at home. We saw what happened when somebody tried to self-prescribe what they thought was chloroquine and ended up drinking some
fish tank
cleaner and died. So really, let's not run out and start mega dosing. We've talked about this before. As Damon mentioned, if you have a deficiency, when the deficiency should be remedied, and ideally with diet. We talked about the fact that it's hard to get vitamin D from your diet, and so we have recommended supplementing that, but certainly not megadosing it to reach any super physiological levels or any toxic levels. This is the big concern.
Which is pretty easy to reach when you're talking about the heavy metal stuff. I know that colloidal silver has been talked about a lot. That's something you don't want to take too much of. Same thing, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so any of the fat-soluble vitamins you're going to build up because they're going to store in your adipose tissue, and so you can reach a toxic level, and that can be fatal. So with vitamin D, we recommend a fairly conservative amount, but just be careful.
Yeah. Next on the list is protein. Is protein bad for you? Some people might be concerned that eating protein is bad for them, and it's pretty important for us to make sure and settle the score on that now, in particular because of the benefits that can be had from getting adequate protein.
And I think traditionally this comes from the whole notion that protein is going to harm your kidneys, and so on and so forth. And there's actually a lot of data out there now. They've researched this for many, many, many years, and they've found that if you do not already have a pre-existing kidney injury or condition, it's not going to cause a problem. Now,
some great research from Jose Antonio, a PhD from the president of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, has done mega dosing of protein overfeeding studies, 2 and 3 grams per pound of body weight. So we're more concerned about the opposite. We're more concerned about people looking at the longevity research and suggesting that restricting protein might slow down the mTOR pathway and therefore make them live longer like the rats did. There's no human evidence of that. And it could be counterproductive now, in particular, when you need a healthy system. Protein's very important, not just for muscle.
Right. Protein is your antibodies. So if you get sick, you need some antibodies to fight that off. So that's why taking it is pretty important. That doesn't mean you need a lot. So in our system, we kind of simplify it because in science, they use a gram per kilogram. For us, if you're getting a gram per pound of body weight, you're getting more than enough protein for your needs, likely.
Yeah. Next on the list, by that same token, is carbohydrates, which has been largely demonized as well. Let's talk about carbs. Is this a time to be cutting out carbs?
I would say no. So there's some pretty strong data out there to show that eating an appropriate amount of carbohydrates will actually strengthen immune function, and it can help with your gut microbiome. And what it does is it is protein sparing, meaning that it allows the protein in your body to do what it's meant to do. Things like become antibodies and repair tissue. So carbohydrates are definitely something that I think is beneficial.
Yeah, and here's just an interesting study, a recent study that where they restricted dietary fat led to body fat loss at a rate 68% higher than cutting the same number of carbohydrate calories when adults with obesity are on strictly controlled diets. Now, mind you, these were not diabetics. And in the case of a diabetic, we have recommended some carbohydrate restriction, mainly because people tend to overeat carbs, and weight loss is the primary goal with diabetes, not necessarily because the carbohydrates have shown to be adverse in a hypocaloric diet with losing weight. It was interesting what they said here that compared to the reduced fat diet, the reduced carb diet was particularly effective at lowering insulin secretion, but the reduced carb diet, but the reduced fat diet, they lost even more body fat than during the reduced carb diet. So they said it resulted in a greater imbalance between the fat eaten and the fat burned. And that might sound counterintuitive, but in fact, it just kind of demonstrates that there's a lot of research that tends to point to both sides of the equation, and we're just saying that it's not conclusive, and you shouldn't be concerned about carbs in particular. You should be looking more at the calorie deficit and the weight loss.
Yeah, and I know we don't usually get too technical, but just kind of giving a little insight as to why that may have happened in that study is, the mechanism of action there is that in order to fully take fat through and metabolize it, it has to bind to oxaloacetate, which is the last step of the Krebs cycle. So in order to get to that last stage, you need enough carbohydrate to complete the cycle. So the old saying in science is that fat burns at a carbohydrate flame, and that's why they're saying that. So
let's go down a list of foods that we don't want to demonize, particularly now, and with everything we've got going on in food. Some foods being hard to get.
Yeah.
So let's not avoid these.
Some that I've seen that are still pretty available are dairy, and that's a great thing to consume as long as you don't have a big lactose issue. And even if you do, we recommend, and all of the medical organizations recommend, that you try to find a tolerable dose because it's so high in calcium, and it's the most bioavailable form of calcium. So,
good study on dairy here said neither total dairy intake nor intake of any specific dairy products was found to be associated with all-cause mortality. In the most recent meta-analysis, including 12 observational studies of milk intake and mortality, there were no consistent associations between milk intake and all-cause or cause-specific mortality. It's important not to. A lot of folks, ethical vegans in particular, will try and associate dairy with inflammation. It's just not true. There are some people who are lactose intolerant, and those people should not consume dairy. If you've got a peanut allergy, don't consume peanuts. If you have an allergy to shellfish, don't consume shellfish. But as for a good portion of the people, you can take in dairy. If you got a lactose intolerance, you might try a Greek yogurt. And if that doesn't work for you, then a hard cheese like a cheddar or Parmesan cheese would be adequate, with almost no lactose. And still a great food source for you for your general health. Lots of good research on that as well, so don't avoid dairy.
Yeah, something that you may or may not be able to get in your area is red meat. In terms of nutrient profile, I mean, this is one of the best things you can eat. So you're getting, your 10 essential nutrients out of there, zinc, magnesium, protein, iron is a big deal. You're getting a lot of heme iron there. So
everybody's running out and getting ZMA.
Yeah.
And loading up on zinc right now. And eat your red meat. It's right there. Yep. Your creatine, your carnitine, selenium. It's a fantastic source of all those nutrients that people are out trying to supplement right now.
Yep. We touched on this a little bit last week. Salt. People are concerned with that and hypertension. And in our last video, we kind of touched on that. As long as you're not a very salt-sensitive person, there's no reason to avoid it. And in fact, you may want to increase it a little bit, or at least salt your meals to taste. There's some iodine in there. Iodine is going to help with your thyroid function as long as you're getting iodized salt. Quick note, some of the sea salts or the pink Himalayan stuff it's not standardized for mineral content, but the regular iodized salt that you get in the store is usually pretty standard.
Yep. And salt is your first line of defense for your skin to protect you from pathogens. and sodium chloride, hydrochloric acid. Salt helps with your digestive, your hydrochloric acid, and that's your first line of defense for pathogens that might be consumed, and bacteria might be consumed with food that you intake. So having an adequate amount is what we look for, somewhere between 3 to 6 grams of sodium a day. Get below 3, you actually have an increase in all-cause mortality. You get north of 7, and hypertensive people, about 10 to 15% of the population who is hypertensive may have an adverse reaction with increased blood pressure. And even then, it can be countered with adequate potassium intake. So we're looking for that sweet spot. Don't avoid it.
Yep. Next one's eggs, in particular whole eggs or egg yolks. A lot of people throw those out. They'll replace it with some peanut butter, which is probably counterproductive. So eggs are wonderful in terms of nutrient profile, just like the red meat. Same thing with the egg yolk. The majority of the protein, it's more concentrated in the yolk, and that's where you're getting your choline and all the other nutrients are in the egg yolk. So it's also the most bioavailable form of protein, so they consider that the gold standard.
And folks asked about diet soda again. That's been covered ad nauseum on the internet, and jump in on that one.
The only thing there is, the sugar alcohols may or may not affect some people's GI and may or may not cause some distress there. But in terms of safety, absolutely they're fine. And there's a lot of misconception about, well, it'll make you hungrier, and that hasn't really been able to be demonstrated very well in the literature. Some people will anecdotally say that it increases their appetite, but in terms of safety, nothing wrong with that. And it's a pretty, viable way and practical way to potentially reduce some calories that people may have otherwise gotten from soda. Obviously, we're recommending water as a first form of fluid intake, but if you need something with a little bit of flavor, have at it.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it on organic versus conventional foods, and we should probably do another entire episid with Food Science Babe on GMOs.
Oh, definitely.
People running around now convinced that GMOs is going to somehow decrease their immune system. What do you have to say about that?
That's really a misconception as well. We've got, decades worth of data on GMOs, and there's never been one instance to show any kind of relationship to an adverse reaction in terms of health. And those foods are very nutrient dense, and they provide a great source. And in terms of food supply, we probably need those. So
it's funny because we're at the end of our list that we were making here. We talked about home workouts. There's a lot of people throwing in home workouts, and we're talking about the banned workouts. And ironically, just as we stepped up here, old Vinny's been texting me. I don't even think Vinny even has a copy of the Vertical Diet because he keeps asking me all the questions that are already in the Vertical Diet. So Vinny, get the Vertical Diet before you ask any questions. But this one was interesting. And Vinny said here, can you still gain a great amount of muscle using resistance bands? He got a nope from me, and then he asked, how come? So how come? First we'll talk about just the home workout. Resistance bands can be of benefit.
They can absolutely be a benefit. And I think especially right now, most people are, they're obviously doing their workouts at home. In terms of making, great strides or great gains with bands, that may not happen in terms of making these great strides forward, but you're probably not going to lose anything, right? So the whole concept of maintaining what you have requires a lot less stimulus than actually making an advancement. So for right now, they're absolutely useful, and you can get a lot done with them and be really creative. But you're probably not going to become Mr. Universe if you weren't already close. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I always said it's half as hard to maintain and twice as hard to gain. So this is a time to focus on maintenance. It doesn't take all that much to maintain. Just something within a couple reps of failure would be great. Some push-ups, some chin-ups, and maybe using those bands for some lunges or some Bulgarian split squats to give a little extra tension to those single leg movements would be ideal at this time.
Bands are great, especially because they're what we'd call progressive resistance. So when you've got them extended as much as possible, it's a rubber band, so there's more tension at the end of that than at the beginning. So it can get you out of the hole if you're doing certain exercises. That's why a lot of people will use them on squats or benching, because you can get out of the hole easier, but at the top of that rep, it's going to be a higher tension. So it's a higher load on the muscle. So you can get really creative with bands at home. I mean, just, be careful. Don't smack yourself in the face with them or anything like that. So
those were the high points for this week's kind of fake news. If you have any other myths that you have come across, people told you one thing or another, it just didn't sound right to you, go ahead and DM me at Stan Efferding or at The Vertical Diet, and we'll address them next week as well. We get ourselves through this quarantine. We've got 3 more weeks, I think, before what we're hoping will be a reopening of our economy on what is that, Easter weekend is hopefully kind of what we're focused on. So we'll see. So we'll be back next week. Any other questions, we'll just send them to me at The Vertical Diet or at Stan Efferding, and we'll answer them for you next week.